First, we're going to look at behavioral adaptations, and we have to answer the question, what is a behavior? So we have a stimulus, which is a change in the environment, and then your behavior is your response to that change. Behaviors come in two types. We have innate behaviors that you're born with. They're instincts, and they're actually coded for by your DNA. And then we have learned behaviors that you get from experience. And both of these help organisms survive and reproduce, since that's the purpose of life. So some of the ones that help in survival: phototaxis, which means moving to light; chemotaxis, moving to food; habituation, getting used to it. So like, for example, when you go into a room and maybe there's like a buzzing noise, and then after a few minutes you no longer hear it because it doesn't help you to be able to hear something that's constant. Trial and error is pretty self-explanatory. And then classical conditioning. And remember, classical conditioning is learning by association, made famous by Pavlov with his dog. And you can just think of training a dog by associating an action and a command with a treat. Additionally, we have some that are based on times of limited resources. So hibernation, which is in order to conserve food, and then estivation, when it's hot and there's a lack of water. Additionally, we have behaviors to aid in reproduction. So these are going to help you attract a mate, compete for mates, and then raise offspring. So courtship, think like peacock feathers, helps to attract mates. Aggressive behavior, think elk fighting each other, helps females identify the males that have the most beneficial traits. Imprinting, where the little baby chicks will latch on mentally to whoever is providing them with food and safety as their mother. And then suckling, which allows mammal babies to actually get food. Now let's look at some structural adaptations. So structural adaptations help get food, avoid predators, move materials, and maintain homeostasis. In plants, we're going to look at moving materials. So we have some plants that are non-vascular, meaning that they don't have a circulatory system. And then other plants are vascular, meaning they have such a system. So when we're looking at this, the general trend is that we're going to be moving farther from water, and we're going to be getting larger and more complex. So first we have moss. And moss is a non-vascular plant, which means it doesn't have a circulatory system to move water around its body. And so it has to be very near water, and it cannot grow very tall because it can't move water up and down. Next, we're going to have some vascular plants. So we have ferns and then trees. And they're getting better and better at moving water, and so they can get bigger, more complex, and move further away from water. Next, let's look at some unicellular organism structural adaptations. So the first one we have here is cilia, and they're just these little tiny hairs for movement and getting food. We have the flagellum, which is a whip-like structure, again for movement and getting food. The eye spot, which helps the cell see light so it can move to it, so it's involved in phototaxis. And this particular organism is going to do that because it has chloroplasts and does photosynthesis. Pseudopods are another thing for movement and getting food, and they mean false foot. And so they send out these little cellular projections, and they pull themselves along that way. The contractile vacuole is a pump to get rid of excess water. So especially if you're living in a freshwater system, osmosis is going to be bringing water into the cell. And this is a problem because eventually the cell will swell up and it could burst, or it could just disrupt the cellular functions. So the cell's got to get rid of it. So it has these little pumps, so that would be active transport, to move the water out of the cell and maintain homeostasis. Finally, let's look at some of the reproductive adaptations. So remember, there's two methods of reproduction. Asexual, which is easy and simple, but it doesn't provide any variation. And sexual reproduction, which does increase variation, but you do have to find a mate and all those other things. So again, the general trend throughout all of these things is moving away from water and becoming more complex and more efficient. So in plants, the least complex and least able to be away from water reproductive system is spores. And moss and ferns both use spores. These have to land in the exact right place. They require water for fertilization. So that's why you find these organisms very close to water. Next we have seed plants. And these break down into two different types. We have gymnosperms. And gymnosperms use cones. They are fertilized by air. So the pollen travels over the air from a male cone to a female cone. And then we have angiosperms. And angiosperms have flowers, which was a major evolutionary advancement. Because now you can have things like pollinators, bees, and birds and bats and things actually assist in the pollination process. And the flowers turn into fruits, which can then aid in the distribution of the seeds, because animals will eat them, take them with them, and scatter the seeds around. So again, we're able to move further from water and get more complex and efficient. So when we look at a phylogenetic tree, spores come first, and so moss has spores. Then we get vascular tissue with ferns, but they still have spores. Then we get seeds, things like pines, which are gymnosperms. Then we get flowers, and apples, which are angiosperms. Now let's look at animal reproduction. And again, moving away from water and getting more complex. So fish and amphibians have these gelatinous eggs, and they use external fertilization, where the female basically dumps out some eggs on the bottom of the creek, and then the male just fertilizes them externally of the mother. And this works fine, but you can't do this on land. So then we're going to be using internal fertilization. And the first reason why this had to happen was shelled eggs. So a shelled egg is a major advancement because when you put a hard shell around it, now it doesn't dry out. And so reptiles and birds can live much farther inland. You have reptiles that live in the desert. But you can't externally fertilize something that's got a hard shell on it. So the evolutionary development of internal fertilization had to occur. Finally, we have the placental form of reproduction. This is what mammals do. And the thing is as you become more complex, it takes a longer time to create that kind of baby. They have to have a longer gestation period. And an egg just simply can't hold enough food to do that. So the placental system allows the baby to continually feed from the mother for 9 months in the case of humans, 18 months in the case of elephants, and allows mammals to be much, much more complex. So again, if we look at this at a phylogenetic tree, we start with external fertilization and gelatinous eggs with fish and amphibians. Then we get internal fertilization with our shelled eggs, with our reptiles and our birds. And finally, we get our placental reproduction with our mammals.